For me, Paul and Virginia are all about survival.
The fountain was named after a French novella.
Our sculpture doesn't look like most others.
It goes back quite some time, as far as probably 1887.
Hey Salukis, I'm Jeff Gleam, Executive Director of the SIU Alumni Association, and welcome back to another edition of Saluki Sleuths. In this episode, as you can imagine, yes, we're going to take a deeper dive into the Paul and Virginia statue. What is it? What is the story behind it? Is there really a Paul and Virginia? Well, we went digging and found some answers. Here's Anna Toomey with more.
Paul and Virginia. Behind those young faces are more than a century of stories. These two have watched over SIU through fires, riots, and even vandalism. They've become a symbol of hope and protection.
But the Paul and Virginia we all know so well, the pair that sit right here in front of Shryock Auditorium, are actually just a copy. The original fountain sits about a half-mile away from here at the Stone Center.
And as you walk in this way, you immediately see on your right the Paul and Virginia fountain.
Catherine Syme takes us to the Stone Center courtyard where the original Paul and Virginia are surrounded by nature.
My name is Catherine Syme. I'm Senior Director of Gift Planning with the SIU Foundation.
Catherine oversees a group of SIU legacy donors known as the Paul and Virginia Society. As part of that role, she's learned a lot about the fountain's journey to SIU.
It's a representation of the Enlightenment school of education. There's the idea that the best education is when we're really grounded in nature.
Catherine says the original Paul and Virginia was brought to campus in 1887, more than 100 years ago. At the time, it was located in front of the old main building, which once stood close to where Shryock is now. The fountain was moved away from this spot after campus unrest in the late 60s, during which Old Main burned to the ground. Years later, the duplicate, cast in bronze, took its place.
The fountain was named after a French novella by Jacques-Henri Bernardin de Saint-Pierre. The novella is Paul et Virginie.
Catherine says it's a dramatic story called Paul and Virginia, first published in the late 1700s.
The novel itself is sort of problematic when viewed through a 21st century lens, but it really impacted many people in the time. It came out in 1788.
The theme of the fountain centers around two young children who grow up to be lovers.
It's the story of two children who were sort of left with their mothers on this tropical island, and they just grow up with this natural education, learn to sort of be their best selves away from the artifice of society, which is sort of the overall theme. And of course, ultimately they fall in love, but then of course, because it's French and tragic, they get separated and somebody has to go back to society, which is just all tears.
The story has inspired centuries of artwork, including operas, novels, and even movies.
There is an iconic scene in the novella where Paul and Virginie are sheltering under a rainstorm, and she has an umbrella and she shares it with him. It's supposed to be sort of this very pivotal scene in the story.
Paul and Virginia statues and fountains have been replicated around the world. We spoke with Susanna Munson at the University Museum. She says what makes SIU's Paul and Virginia unique is that it shows the pair as young children instead of teenage lovers.
There are many different variations on the sculpture of Paul and Virginia across the world. It was a very popular story, and a lot of people created sculpture to represent it. Our sculpture doesn't look like most others, but in the 1800s, Paul and Virginia sculptures were a really popular type of sculpture that people had in their home gardens.
It's possible the model for SIU's Paul and Virginia statue may have come from the first official World's Fair to be held in the United States in 1876.
I'm Eric Jones from Property Control, and I've been interested in Paul and Virginia for a long time.
Eric tracked down the World's Fair connection through a memo a former SIU University Museum curator wrote to the Philadelphia Museum of Art, which had a similar statue.
The story goes that this particular fountain was based on a little terracotta garden sculpture, like a garden gnome, that was popular at the World's Fair of 1876. People liked lots of little garden doodads in Victorian times, so it wasn't originally, they weren't all fountains to begin with, they were just sculptures.
According to a catalog from the 1876 World's Fair, the terracotta sculpture was located in the Italian section and stood about 47 inches tall.
The World's Fair was a big deal in those days because people didn't have to look at the outside world like we do now with television and the internet and so forth. So that was where people got the latest ideas. And there were people from SIU who went to the fair on the train, even though it seems far. It was in Philadelphia, celebrating the 100th anniversary of our nation.
We spoke with SIU architect Brian Gorecki, who was part of recent repair work to both the original Paulin, Virginia fountain and the replica. Brian says it's possible the replica fountain sits atop the oldest structure on campus.
The original was a donation from the class of 1886. And it arrived here on campus sometime between 1886 and 1887, apparently. And I believe that perhaps the base of the fountain was actually here prior to that.
Brian has scoured through dozens of photos dating back to the late 1800s. He believes the base of this fountain has been around since SIU's beginning, the 1870s, when we were known as SIU Normal University.
In 1883, there was a fire that pretty much destroyed the Normal building. I'm suggesting that the fountain base survived, and at some point in time later, 1886-ish, an obelisk appeared in photographic evidence, I should say, from that relatively in that point in time. And then 1886 to 1887 is when we documented that the fountain, the statue, appeared on campus. I feel that the fountain base that we're standing here with is the oldest structure on campus.
The recent repair work done to both the original Paulin, Virginia and the replica was sponsored by the class of 1965.
Well, all the capstones were removed. We repointed, tuck pointing, basically repairing the masonry joints of the entire fountain. We replaced the capstones, new mortar, the stone base of the Paulin, Virginia statue. There was a couple pieces that were broken.
Over the years, Brian says the umbrella has been stolen or vandalized numerous times. The University Facilities Department now keeps an extra on hand.
The umbrella is more true to the original circa 1887 fountain in that it's more rounded, and the tip where the water actually comes out of the top, that's more true to the original. Based on photographic evidence, we were able to figure out a more authentic tip and umbrella. One detail I found interesting as far as Paulin, Virginia, the way they face has changed over the years.
Brian says in the late 1800s, the pair started out facing east, the same way they're facing now.
However, there's some pictures between now and back then where they were facing west. For example, there's some pictures when Old Main was here and Paulin, Virginia was facing Old Main. So those kind of details, you wonder, okay, who turned them around, or did they turn around on their own?
You never know.
To many, the statues of Paulin, Virginia are a symbol of strength and hope. They've watched over SIU's campus, and they've inspired donations that help students and programs at SIU succeed. Legacy donors from the Paulin, Virginia Society have made commitments to SIU through their wills and estates that total more than $60 million.
I love the image of the umbrella, because an umbrella provides coverage, it provides protection, and in many ways, that's what the gifts from our donors do.
It's an old Saluki tradition that if you toss a coin into the fountain on your way to class before a test, it'll bring you good luck.
For me, Paulin, Virginia are all about survival. We've been here almost since the beginning, and they've survived not only the burning of Old Main, but all kinds of vandalism problems.
I've always gotten the impression that it is a really important part of campus life as well. It's a good landmark. It's been here forever. A lot of people have interacted with it in various ways over the years. And every time they do the summer concert series, everybody is out here next to Paulin, Virginia. Whether or not they understand the importance of it, they know that it's right there.
Well, we hope you enjoyed this edition of Saluki Sleuths. And I want to thank all of you who wrote in and wanted to hear more about the Paul and Virginia story. Thank you so much. I also want to thank our university experts for all their expertise in providing background information for our stories. We couldn't do it without your help. Keep the stories coming, keep your ideas flowing, and until we meet again, go Dogs.